So this morning, I am going to have us start with just a bit of a reflective meditation about faith. So I invite you to just maybe close your eyes and just think about some of these questions that I'm going to ask. What is faith? Do we have to be religious people to have faith? What do we have faith in? Is there something that we trust unconditionally that we know to be true? Perhaps the rising and setting of the sun, the cycle of seasons, the rhythms of nature. What about faith in our own lives? Are there people we have faith in? Are there concepts or principles that we have faith in? And for that matter, what does it mean to have faith? What does it mean to be faithful? Must we believe in a higher power to have faith? And for that matter, what exactly is a higher power anyways? These are some of the questions that I invite you this month to reflect on as you're going through your day-to-day lives. You're welcome to keep your eyes closed now, or you can open them. So, what is faith? According to Wikipedia, faith, derived from Latin fides and Old French fide, is confidence or trust in a person, thing, or concept. Confidence or trust in a person, thing, or concept. Our theme for this month is renewing faith. And when I first saw that theme, to be honest, I wasn't even sure what that really meant. Renewing faith in what? And so I realized perhaps the key to it all is first discerning what it is that we have faith in. And once we know that, maybe we can reflect on when, where, how our faith throughout our lives has been shaken, so to speak, in the people around us who let us down, in a principle or concept that no longer holds true, to a way of being we were brought up to believe and perhaps no longer abide by. And then if at some point in time our faith in something or someone was shaken, what do we do with that? What do we do when the people we put our faith in let us down? What do we do when the organizations let us down because they're made up of people? How do we renew that faith? How do we move forward in relationship? I very much believe that faith, spiritual journey, religion, etc., is meant to help us live our lives here in this world, and it must have relevance for the here and now in this place and time. If not, it's simply a theoretical intellectual exercise. And we live in a world that must move beyond the theoretical and intellectual phases of evolution if we are to survive as a human species. And so the questions I want to explore with all of us this month are, how does our spiritual journey, our religion, our faith impact who we are in the world? How does it impact our relationships? How does it impact our community? What is the intrapsychic impact of being on a spiritual journey and or being part of a faith community? As Unitarian Universalists, we all find ourselves here for different reasons and different motivations. Some of us have had some type of spiritual awakening and would say that we're on a spiritual path. We just don't know quite what it looks like. Some of us are here mainly for community and to be with like-minded people in a place where social action is taking place. Some of us were raised with the belief that faith communities, churches, synagogues are just what you do on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning. There's a large segment of people out there today who refer to themselves as spiritual, but not religious. In other words, they understand that they are on a spiritual journey, but don't necessarily feel like it needs to happen within the confines of a specific organized setting. And so it's all out there, and we are all human beings living our lives trying to make meaning out of this place we find ourselves, regardless of our specific religious, spiritual set of beliefs or non-beliefs. And it might sound like I'm setting this up to say it ultimately doesn't matter, but it does matter. And I believe that it matters deeply because this world matters. Who we are matters. Our relationships matter. Our communities matter. These lives that we're living, they matter. In her book, Eyes Wide Open, psychotherapist Mariana Kaplan writes, "We must understand that in these times, we cannot afford to aspire to enlightenment or even to acquire wisdom for ourselves alone. We must do so for the good of all beings and the healing of the earth and all of its inhabitants. Insight must be integrated into action, and the harmony we wish to see on the earth must simultaneously be cultivated in our own bodies and our own lives." And so, how do we make sense of this world through the lens of faith, religion, and spirituality? Kaplan also writes, "Our spiritual path and practices must support us in being part of the solution to the immense challenges humanity faces, not part of the problem. This is not a time for monks on mountaintops. It is a time to pursue our spiritual work with depth, focus, and efficiency, and bring whatever morsels of wisdom we discover to all of our structures and systems, whether they be families, schools, politics, and policy, in order to transform these structures and infuse life force and integrity back into a suffering earth and cultures that are increasingly void of spirit. Insight and awakening must be actualized externally. I'm going to say that again, and let us just think about what she really means by that. Insight and awakening must be actualized externally. I believe that we as humanity are waking up, and as we have some of these internal spiritual or religious experiences, we can't get lost in that. She's saying we have to then look outside of us and use some of these experiences to help create the world that we want to be living in. And so on Friday night, the Grand Valley community came together at St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church to join in their prayer service, and then a candlelight vigil for the people in Ukraine. It brought me great comfort to realize that the prayers being sung and the rituals offered were the exact same prayers and rituals that 70% of Ukrainian people are singing today. It brought me great comfort that in the course of 24 hours, once again, numerous faith communities here in Grand Junction were able to come together to show solidarity regardless of our beliefs, our traditions, or our rituals. I love the fact that as a community of religious leaders, not one of us ever feels like we need to take the credit. I've been on the news numerous times for events that have happened in an interfaith setting. Dave Edwards, who represents the synagogue, has been on the news, and on Friday night, it was Father Jeremy from St. Nicholas who took the lead and was interviewed and articulated what was going on in this community in a beautiful, moving way. That's, I think, what it means to be living our faith in an external way. And being back at St. Nicholas reminded me of a conversation I had one time with the previous priest from St. Nicholas, Father Luke. He asked me in all sincerity a few years ago, he said, what does it mean when people refer to themselves as spiritual but not religious? For him, it was simply a concept that he could not comprehend, as his spirituality was 100% connected to his religious experience. And having spent time in St. Nicholas in the Orthodox churches, for those of you that don't know, that's where my husband Cameron is a member, and both of our kiddos were actually baptized at St. Nicholas. So having spent a little bit of time with how they do their services on Sundays and their ritual, I can see how Father Luke might not understand the distinction between religious and spiritual the way that some of us in this room do, as there is not really separation in that tradition of the mystical and the religious. The understanding is that the religious liturgy is meant to connect with our higher mystical selves, and it is set up that way, from the icons on the walls and the ceilings to the musical chanting back and forth between the priest and the chanters, to the incense that fill the senses. In their traditional liturgy, all of the senses are engaged so that the mind, the intellect, has the opportunity to take a back seat. And Cameron once told me the reason he loves going to St. Nicholas is because it is the one block of time in his week that his intellect is not engaged. He can relax his mind in a way that helps him transcend out of his thinking brain, get into his body in a way that then can help him have a spiritual experience. And so, as I have been thinking about what it means to renew faith, so to speak, it was a gift for me to be back in St. Nicholas, where my senses remembered the ritual while at the same time taking Mariana Kaplan's words seriously, in that our faith must always be about more than ourselves. As we sat in that church on Friday night, we were out there because of love. We were out there doing an action out of a need for connection and a recognition of our interconnected nature of human beings who collectively want more for this world than what we are currently experiencing as a collective humanity. So I believe that faith can help with this. A few months ago in January, I shared some wisdom from Yogananda, and I was thinking about a part of the documentary I watched about him in January. One of his students asked him one day what he would have to sacrifice or give up if he started working with Yogananda. And Yogananda said, "Do you smoke? Yes. You may continue. Do you drink alcohol? Yes. You may continue. Do you engage in sexual relationship? Yes. You may continue. You mean that I can come up on this hill in this good place and all of these wonderful people and devotees and the brothers up here and study these teachings, and I can go back down there and do all these things?" "Absolutely," he said. "But I will not promise you that as you continue to study these teachings, that the desire to do these things will not fall away from you." This, I think, is what it means to be on a spiritual path. We are still very much human. We are still going to make some mistakes. We are still going to be struggling with addictions and emotions and relationships, and we're going to let people down, and we're going to feel let down by people. But as we work through these things, we may also be changed in profound ways that we cannot even comprehend right now. And so I go back to the book Eyes Wide Open, when Mariana Kaplan says, "Rather than holding on to an imagined concept of enlightenment as a product that can be attained, it may be more helpful to consider spiritual awakening as an endless process of progressively deeper levels of integration." It may be helpful to consider spiritual awakening as an endless process of progressively deeper levels of integration. She reminds us that the spiritual path has many different levels along the way, and many faith traditions talk about the different levels of spiritual awakening. But she reminds us it's important to put our process, our journey into perspective. And she just talks about a few levels of what she calls samadhi. And that is, samadhi is often used to describe a state of one-pointedness and concentration in which the consciousness of the experiencing subject becomes one with the experienced object. And actually, it has many different levels. And as I describe these different levels, I invite you to think about where you might be on the path. So the first level she describes is Vitarka, the first level, and it refers to an intellectual grasp of knowledge or truth derived from deliberate thinking and study. We experience this level of samadhi when we study spiritual texts and receive a great aha or profound level of intellectual comprehension. And I know that I love finding new books that I can either listen to as an audiobook or read. And I love it when I have that aha moment and I understand some of these principles on an intellectual place. I didn't know there was a language for that. That is called Vitarka. The next one is more subtle, and this is called Vikara, and it involves a more subtle understanding attained as a result of personal investigation, where the mind becomes stilled and a depth and acuteness of perception are revealed. Many people who have engaged in an extensive process of meditation and or inquiry have experienced this level of samadhi. And many of those who believe themselves to be enlightened are at this level of development. Now, keep in mind, she said believe themselves to be enlightened. Her point is many of us think we're enlightened when we're really not very far along the path. But that is called Vikara. The next phase is Ananda, otherwise known as bliss. And that is a powerful state of realization that is often mistaken for enlightenment. And it's fairly common among those who deeply engage the paths of yoga, meditation, and inquiry. And then she talks about asmita, which the individual dwells in his or her true self. Not only do these preliminary states have subtle levels of development combined within them, but there exists still further levels of samadhi where consciousness emerges into a mindless, beginningless, and endless state of being. So it's important, I think, that we just think about in a realistic way where we are on the path. Are we somebody that's very, very interested in spiritual and religious principles? Are we somebody that just is here and enjoys an occasional sermon and likes to be part of social action? Every stage that we're at is wonderful and lovely and perfectly okay. And my invitation today is just for us to think about where we are and what we are doing in our internal world and our external world to possibly be living that spiritual path, that religious path, in a way that perhaps brings hope and healing and peace to both us and those people around us. And so I will leave us with just a few questions to ponder today. Are we willing to continue to be engaged, even when the people around us let us down? Are we willing to continue to be engaged when our faith communities demonstrate their own human failings? When what we once believed to be true is found to be built around flawed logic? Are we able and willing to continue to engage, stay committed, and renew our faith, so to speak? Perhaps this little imperfect faith community is a good place for us to practice. And as we reflect on those questions, I invite us to engage in a little bit of music. If you are here in the sanctuary and have a hymnal, it's number 1068 in your teal hymnal, Rising Green. And if you're on Zoom, we have the words for you.
My blood doth rise in the roots of an oak, the sap doth run in my veins, boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands on the wings of time without end, my sight as deep as the sea, beating my heart sounds the measures of hope that have lost eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides resting answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand. Winging my song is the wind of my breast, and my love blows over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love blows over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
May look like you are.